Foster. My parents are William Hunter Bennett and Patricia Christensen Bennett. I grew up in Logan, Utah, not far from the Bear Lake Valley, and I remember hearing wonderful stories about my ancestors' testimonies, obedience, hard work, and sacrifices. Since then, I have had the opportunity to learn more about them, and I love and admire them. Come with me on a tour as we follow in the footsteps of our dear ancestors and explore where they lived and worked in this beautiful valley.
The reason that we are here today is, number one, this is an awesome place, right? The Bear Lake Ranch House is dear to our hearts. We've been, excuse me, I know I'm going to be weepy today. We've been coming since 2009, and it's full of memories for us, and it's in a beautiful spot. And we're so glad that Rachel's family's here this year. Thanks for making the trek from Missouri. And the second bigger reason that we're here is that back in the 1800s, our ancestors who joined a church in England emigrated in different groups to the Bear Lake Valley. They were some of the first white people in the Bear Lake Valley. There had been Native Americans for many, many centuries, and fur trappers. Now the Nate name is an important name in our family, and the reason is that the Nate family immigrated from England here, along with their grandparents, the Passeys, and then the Bennetts emigrated here from Cedar Fort, Utah, and they all met here. And in this story I'm telling about the Bear Lake Valley, there are lots of heroes and heroines, every single one of them. But the one that I identify with the most is Emma Nate Bennett. And a couple of reasons. She left a beautiful handwritten journal that I had an opportunity to see this last week, and my father's belongings, her actual penmanship on paper. And that journal was recorded and included in this beautiful book called Our Legacy. And I'm just going to take it out so you can see it. Believe it or not, this is volume 1 of 2. A little light reading, right? And it's so awesome to read. And her journal is in here. And I've read it numerous times, but to see her own handwriting was very special this last week. And volume 1 is the history of thank you so much, is the history of all of our ancestors in the Bear Lake Valley and those that went up to Canada. And volume 2 is their descendants. And I just brought this one with me because we're focusing on the Bear Lake Valley. And you're all welcome to look at it if you'd like to. So
there's some treasure stories in there, though.
Yes.
For example, I don't remember which ancestor it was, but adorning your dresses was considered vain. And I remember reading that she would hide in the closet and make a chain with a crochet hook and put it around her neck in the closet. So that's being in the closet.
Yeah.
But anyway, just fun little stories like that.
Yeah.
There's another one, was it Eli Bennett? That they were coming west and they could not get this mule to move. And it was pulling a wagon, or a supply wagon, not a covered wagon, I don't think. But somebody suggested building a fire under its belly. So they built a fire under the belly. It took one giant leap and stopped, and the whole wagon burned up.
Pulled the wagon into the fire?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are treasures for sure. And so what I've decided to do is use Emma Nate Bennett as our reference point. So that when I talk about a place, this was Emma's cousin's homestead, or this is where Emma's parents lived. So that she's kind of the center of the wheel, and all the spokes will come out for our tour purposes. And in 2009, my brother Brad and I were in charge of our Bennett reunion up here, our immediate Bennett reunion, my siblings and family. And we found the ranch house, which was great. And I just felt this overwhelming desire to know, well, we know they lived in the Bear Lake Valley, but where did they live? So I spent many, many hours doing research and had the help of a county clerk that found the original deeds and made copies of their homestead maps. Now a homestead, can you hear me okay? Okay, can you hear me? Does it make a difference? Okay, so in 2009 I was working with this county clerk, and she went into the archives and she made these wonderful maps for me. This is one of 5 that we're going to go see. This was the homestead of Emma's cousin, William Passy. And to be a homesteader, you had to be at least 16 years old, and you had to build a building on your property, a shed, a barn, a house, so that it was your stake in the ground. This was your property. And then you had to live there for a certain number of years. So a lot of people wanted to homestead, and they called the property your homestead, and you received a deed. So in 2009, this woman allowed Laura and I, who was with me, to go into the archives, into a sealed area, and she pulled out this big book that had the original deeds in. And we were turning the pages very carefully because these were precious papers, and we both just really felt a special spirit there. So that was in 2009, and we found out all these places and went and just really felt the spirits of our ancestors there. So that's where we're going today. And let's see if there's anything else. Anybody have any questions? What I'm going to do is have you just follow me. We'll pull over to the right, and I'll stop, and you can all get out, and I'll just explain whose homestead we're looking at, who they were, and then we'll get back in the car. And some places will be a little bit longer than others. But I'm hoping it'll be about 2 hours. We'll end up in Montpelier at the Pioneer Museum. In the basement of the Pioneer Museum is a Bible that was brought over on the ocean from England by Sarah Nate Ashley, who was Emma's sister. So that's pretty cool to see.
I have one question.
Okay. Yes.
I have one question, and I have the advantage of having talked to you a lot last night about Emanate. But if you're using Emanate as the reference point, can you quickly describe how Emanate relates to the group?
Oh, thank you, Mike. Thank you. So in 1863, the first relative, Samson Nate, came over to the valley.
Shh. Camille. Sorry about that. That was my daughter.
That's okay. We need a little reminder that everybody's involved. He came over and was one of the founding fathers of the Bear Lake Valley immigration. In about 1871, Emma's grandparents, the Passys, came over. And they wrote back to England and said, "We want your family to come." So her grandmother Passy had 2 sons, George Nate. Her first married name was Nate. Her second married name was Passy, her second marriage. So she was Emma Nate Bennett's paternal grandparents and grandmother. And she had 2 sons from previous marriage, George Nate, or Nate. I keep saying Nate, but it's N-A-T-E or N-E-A-T.
Yeah, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, the original spelling was N-E-A-T, so it looks like Nate, but it's pronounced Nate. So George Nate and Samson Nate were her sons, and Samson came over even before her. Then the Passy grandparents came, and then they sent money back to England to George Nate's family, and he sent his 2 teenage children over first. Then he came, and then Emma and her sister and her mother came last. So by the late 1870s, they were all here. And so they were in England and ended up here. They were fortunate in they were able to ride a train across the country to Evanston, Wyoming, and from there they went by horse and buggy to Bear Lake. They did not have to come across the plains in wagons, at least Emma and her family. But her grandparents did come across the plains, and I'm sure Samson did too. Samson changed his last name to be spelled N-A-T-E, probably so people in America would pronounce it correctly. And George kept the N-E-A-T spelling.
Which makes genealogy so fun.
Yes.
And they're your great And she's your great
Yes.
grandmother.
So Emma is my great grandmother, and her maiden name was Nate, and her married name was Bennett. And
We actually met her, didn't we?
no, we did not.
Well, is it her daughter then?
Her,
At some extended
Yeah.
family reunion.
yeah. So Emma,
We're not that old, evidently.
I was like, what is it?
Yeah.
We just feel like it.
Yeah. So Emma's family came straight to the Bear Lake Valley. Her future husband, William David Bennett, his father and mother crossed the plains. His father was a little boy in Nauvoo. Eli Bennett was his name. He saw Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith riding on horseback, standing up with the bridles. He was in the room when the mantle of Joseph Smith fell upon William. And they did not come west with the first group of saints. They lived in, I believe it was Iowa for a while, and then they came later. So Eli Bennett and Louisa Zufelt came from that area to Utah, to Cedar Fort, which is near Saratoga Springs. And William David Bennett was their son. And his older brother was Eli Bennett Jr. And Eli Bennett came up to Homestead in Bear Lake, and later invited William David to come work on his homestead. And that's when William David met Emma Neat here in Dingle. And Emma was 14 when she emigrated and met him. He was 22. 2 years later they married. She was 16 and he was 24.
Up in the cradle.
And they lived in Dingle. They had 6 children. And lost a child in infancy, and then at that point they received a letter from Lorenzo Snow, Box B, the president's office, asking them to immigrate to Canada and help settle southern Alberta, Canada.
And work with the canal systems up
Yeah,
there.
help build the canal systems for which they would get land. So we're going to see where they had their homestead. We're going to see where Emma Nate Bennett's father, George Nate, and his wife Marianne Fowler, where they had their homestead. We'll see the cemetery where they're buried, and Samson Nate and his 2 wives. And we'll see where the Bennett's homestead was. They call it Bennett Grove to this day. I'll just mention that when times get tough, I think, well, if Emma could do it, then I can do it. So our ancestors set a good example for us, and I think by what we're doing today, we are honoring them and their foundations and touching base with them. So thank you for your patience, and hopefully you can hear in spite of the lawnmowers. So let's get in our cars and we'll caravan to the first homestead.
So we are here now at the area which was the homestead of William Theobald Passy. It is located in Liberty, Idaho. He was a second cousin of Emma Nate Bennett. Their grandmothers were sisters. Their names were Sarah New Nate Passy and Ann New Passy. They both came up to the Bear Lake Valley in the year 1864, some of the earliest settlers that came. And William Theobald lived in Paris, Idaho, but farmed on this homestead. And it was both sides of the road, including a small hill on the opposite side of the road, and it is just really beautiful green farmland. In 1901, he moved to Canada, and he lived in Medicine Hat, McGrath, and Lethbridge. So this is the area of William Theobald Passy's homestead. We will now drive down Lanark Road and turn right onto Highway 89, heading south to Paris, Idaho. We will then turn right on South 2nd North to see the home of Dr. George Frederick Ashley, the son of Sarah Jane Nate Ashley, who was the older sister of Emma Nate, and her husband, George Ashley. It is located at 40 South 2nd North. This home was built in the 1890s and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in Bear Lake County. It features beautiful woodworking inside and out, and the front porch spindlework balustrades are thought to be original to the house. Dr. Ashley was a renowned doctor and surgeon in the Bear Lake Valley, and he established the first hospital in 1912 that was ever built in that part of Idaho at the town of Montpelier. His father, George Ashley, a professional carpenter, built the hospital, as well as helping to build the Paris, Idaho courthouse and tabernacle. Earlier in the 1880s, George Ashley Sr. had also built a beautiful home for his family, which is unfortunately no longer standing, but I believe it was across the street from his son's, Dr. Ashley's home. That home built by George Sr. for his family was a very elaborate home with lots of decorative woodworking and varied architectural designs brought over from England. Here we are at the Paris, Idaho Cemetery. We have several pictures here showing the entrance to the cemetery and the sign, and then a bird's eye view of the cemetery. We have lots of family members buried here. We have Ashleys, including George and Sarah Jane Nate Ashley, and Bird, and Hymus, and Okie, and Orr, and lots of Passies, dozens of Passies, including Anne and John and Sarah and William, the first ones in our extended family that entered the Bear Lake Valley in 1864. It was a very cold winter. In fact, I read that first winter for them, they said if it wasn't for the fish in the Bear Lake, they would have starved to death. And the ice was so thick on their windows, and it was just very cold and a hard, long winter for them. So we're grateful they persevered and established their homes in this valley, this beautiful Bear Lake Valley. We are now going to move on to visit a cabin that is representative of the original cabins that would have been built by our ancestors as well. And it's on Main Street, not far from the Paris Tabernacle. It was the Thomas Slate family home. We are not related to the Thomas Slate family, but we're just going to stop and walk around the cabin and kind of get a feel for what the early homes of our ancestors in this valley looked like.
Hi, this is Camille again. This is one of our stops on the Homestead tour, which is this beautiful Pioneer Tabernacle. It was finished in 1888 and dedicated in 1889 because of a fire that ensued between those times. But it's made out of sandstone, beautiful pioneer workmanship outside and inside. And we think George Ashley helped with some of the woodwork of the podium area and the balconies. And so this is a tribute to our pioneer ancestors.
These are two pictures from inside the interior of the Paris, Idaho Tabernacle. The first one is a view of the back looking forward to the podium of the interior of the tabernacle. It is very beautiful, and our relative George Ashley helped with the woodwork for the podium area, for the stand area. And in the front of the foyer, they have some cabinets with pioneer items and artifacts. And one of those is the second picture, which is a salt dish that belonged to Sarah Nate Passy. So it's kind of fun to see that salt dish and know she probably used it for lots of meals. There are lots of other fun artifacts in the foyer. So this tabernacle is a great monument of lots of work on behalf of our relatives who helped, I'm sure, build it. and Emma Nate and William David left the valley in 1899 to go to Canada, so they would have attended the tabernacle meetings. The land to our left is the homestead property of George and Sarah Nate Ashley. It is located on East 2nd North in Paris, on the road that leads to Dingle. Another name for this road is the Dingle Bottoms Road, and it's about 8 miles between Paris and Dingle. Up ahead, the road will make a left-angle turn, which marks the eastern boundary of their homestead property, and then the property goes a little further north at that point. We are going to be going on our way to the homestead property of George and Marianne Fowler Nate. They are the parents of Emma Nate Bennett, and their homestead property is in Dingle.
Okay, I am standing at the beginning of Nate Lane. This was the lane back to the George Nate, Marianne Fowler homestead back there, where Emma and her family lived when they came from England. And when we were here quite a few years ago, there was a little marker that said Nate Lane, but maybe it's got new property owners now. But you go down and then a diagonal road, it comes to the stop with some logs. You can't go any further. And it looked like when Laura and I were here back in 2009 that there was an old dry creek bed and some old cottonwood trees. And Emma talks about the cottonwood trees on their property. So this was called Nate Lane, and it's just off of Dingle Bottoms Road. Heading further east is Dingle. And Paris was behind us. So, special land here.
And Bear Lake is just
If you want to take a
that
little video of
direction.
this homestead map.
Yeah.
We just came from Paris down Dingle Bottoms Road right here. We're going to go straight into Dingle. But right here, Nate Lane comes down like this, and their property was in orange here. George Neat Homestead. We are in the Dingle Cemetery, and we have 3 headstones here in front of me. Samson Nate, who was a brother to George Nate, Emma's uncle, Samson Nate. And he changed his name to spell N-A-T-E. Original spelling would have been N-E-A-T. And then he had 2 wives, Marianne Cottrell Nate and Elizabeth Cornell Nate. And they're buried on each side of him. And then here's another Nate, Royal Nate. I'm thinking maybe it was a son, but I don't know for sure. So this is all that family.
It's a son. It says, dearest brother that has left us.
Hear thy loss we deeply feel, but 'tis God that hath bereft us. He can all our sorrows heal.
Okay.
This is
How old was
Iona
he when
Merle, Nate.
How old was he?
7.
Almost 6.
Almost 6. So we'll have to do a little research to find out about his relationship.
Here's another Nate.
Another Nate right here.
Died at age 21, roughly.
Does that say Ione?
Iona Merle,
Merle.
Nate. Does that name ring a bell? Yeah.
No, it doesn't. And another Nate over here.
And there too.
Oh my goodness. Samson William II. Danny Lawrence. The Ream family was a big name in Dingle. Just around the bend from here is what they call the Ream Mansion that was built in the early 1900s. And it's Jessica Woods, my friend, her ancestors.
And that was Samson over there, right?
Yes.
And this is Samson W. the second.
Yes.
So maybe a son?
I bet it is a son.
There's a picture of the Ream couple on this side of
Oh, that would have been more recent.
Yeah.
Recent. And then this Nate is more recent too.
Do you want me to pan over to this one?
Okay. More Nates over here. Edward Franklin Nate in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Leander Nate. J. Edward Nate. Okay. And these are Nates over here.
That big one.
Well, there are more Nates than I found last time. So this is the headstone of George Nate and his wife, Mary Ann Fowler Nate. And it's a very beautiful and unique headstone. Once you find it, it's easy to spot again. And here it says, Mary A.F., Mary Ann Fowler Nate, born July 8, 1834, died January 10, 1896. George Nate, born June, is it June? August 22nd, 1832, died April 17th, 1907. In 2009, when we first discovered this cemetery headstone, it was broken. Pieces were on the ground. There was a crack in one of these pillars right here. And we felt very sad about it. And I met a woman who is related to the Fowlers at church in Liberty. And I told her about it, and she said, well, we'll have to see what we can do about that. The next time I came in 2013, it was all fixed. So I appreciate that Fowler family taking it on to fix it. So it's been here for a long time, and it's a beautiful headstone. And there are two other smaller headstones that are Fowler also. We have Samuel Fowler right here. It's kind of hard. Can you tell what his birth and death date?
Born March 12th, 1812, died December 24th, 1893. And then over here, Anne Linton Fowler, born June 21st, 1803, died June 30th, 1891.
Okay. I wonder if they were husband and wife. We'll have to look on family search. Okay, so we found some Fowlers and some Nates and a whole bunch more Nates in the cemetery. I know I think that's about it in the cemetery. Hi again. So we are now at what was called and is still called Bennett Grove. Down below us is the farmland and where the homes would have been for Eli Bennett Jr. and William David Bennett's families. And Emma and William David had traveled to Cedar Fort and other places to live and different homes in Dingle. This was their final landing spot where they would have received their call to Canada. They would have left from here. And I've heard that they felt like they kind of arrived here. They had a home, a barn, fields, farms. They were kind of ready to thrive rather than just survive. And then they got the call. So I'm not sure how long they were here before they got the call, but it was hard to leave this. And part of the homestead is farmland, and it's that point of the mountain over there, over to this point of the mountain, would have been their homestead. Down here, and then a large portion of the hilly area behind, or in front of me up here, where they would have had their cattle grazing. And when you wanted to homestead, you had to be at least 16 years old. You had to build a building of some kind on the property, and you had to homestead for a certain period of time. And so there probably were some shacks up on those peaks where they were having their cattle grazed just to have it be their claim. So they had farmland and hillside, part of their homestead. Here's a picture of the homestead. we are at this point right here. So from this point of the mountain to this point of the mountain was their farmland, and then the hills up above us. So this is Bennett Grove.
Now I'm going to tell you about our last homestead that we're going to talk about, which belonged to Samson Nate. He was a brother of George Nate, and George Nate was Emma Nate Bennett's father. So Samson Nate had a homestead on Dingle Road on the north end of this town, where the Dingle Road makes a sharp left turn and then a sharp right turn and continues on north. Those two turns are kind of in the middle of his homestead, with the remainder of his homestead going north for several hundred feet on the right side of Dingle Road. He and his wife, Mary Ann Cottrell Nate, came over with a wagon train after emigrating from England and landed in Lehigh. And then not long after that, they were called to move up to the Bear Lake Valley and came up in the year 1864 in October with not much time to build a home. So they built a very small cabin with no windows and a dirt floor, but it was a good refuge for them in the winter. And later they moved to this homestead that I'm describing. And later, when they were in Idaho, he took a second wife whose name was Elizabeth Cornell Nate. Their family had 17 children and 100 grandchildren. There's an interesting story about Samson Nate. In his patriarchal blessing, it said he would live until the time his hair turned white. And towards the latter part of his life, his hair did turn white, and he knew that it was getting close to him moving on, and he told family members that he was going to be dying soon. And when he was on his deathbed, he said he wanted to sing "Come, Come Ye Saints," and he had been known to whistle now and then, but he seldom ever sang. Yet on his deathbed, he sang the first verse of "Come, Come Ye Saints," and they said his notes were so clear that there was not a dry eye in the room. And his last words of the song were his last words, "All is well." So that's a very special memory of a very noble person. Here is a picture of the National Oregon and California Trail Center. I like to call it the Pioneer Museum because in the basement level there is a Pioneer Museum, which includes a lot of pioneer artifacts from the valley. We were especially surprised and delighted in 2009 when we first visited the museum to discover that the Bible on display was actually a family Bible brought over across the ocean by George and Sarah Jane Nate Ashley. They allowed us to take off the plexi cover and actually hold the Bible and turn the pages. We felt so honored to do that. Unfortunately, there were no family names inside the covers or the pages of the Bible, but still, to know it was brought over by the Ashley family back in the 1800s was such a privilege. We also discovered a picture of George Ashley and a picture of Samson Nate and his wife Mary Ann Cottrell. And there was a description of the Bible as well as a brief history of the Ashley family. So it was really fun to see our family represented in the Pioneer Museum portion of the center. The top level of the center has beautiful artwork reminiscing about the early years in the valley and mountain areas in the Wasatch Front. And you don't have to pay to go into the museum to look at things. It's all free admission. The only thing you have to pay for is if you want to participate in a special program. But everything is free as far as going in and looking at all the pioneer artifacts. And there's a gift shop as well. The hours are 9 to 4. And it's good to call because sometimes they close early at 3. Not usually, but sometimes they do. So 9 to 4 is the typical time frame. So that is the end of our Homestead tour, plus some other historical sites mixed in along the way. And it's such a wonderful privilege to know where our ancestors lived and to feel their spirits. And we hope you've enjoyed the tour and that you will come back to the Bear Lake Valley with your families and retake the tour with them and pass on the knowledge of these very special sites. Bye-bye.